Policemen, women of Reddit, what is the most horrifying situation you've been called to? Part 3. Please like and subscribe to support this channel. This sorta counts? I'm a medic. I had just gotten off of my normal 24-hour shift at 6:45 when I get back to my apartment. My neighbor across the way is out with his dog getting her to go to the bathroom. So like we normally do, I grab my dog, bring her out to poop, and we chat for a bit. About 30 minutes letting the dogs play, I tell him I'm gonna go inside and sleep because our shift was busy. He says yay, me too. Thinking back, that was kinda weird because it was a Tuesday morning, 7:30 am. He was dressed for work. Well, I'm walking up my stairs and hear a gunshot. I question my sanity for a few minutes until my girlfriend comes out and asks what that noise was. I went to my neighbor's apartment where I thought I heard the sound come from. I knock and wait. Finally, I just open their door. To see him slumped on the couch with blood splatter on the walls and a huge pool of blood on and around the couch. Gloved up because I had one last pair in my pockets, call 911 and check to see if he's still alive. He wasn't. This only troubles me because from the outside his life was great. Nice wife, sweet dog, great job at his family's construction business, making 6 figures before 30. He was always happy when we talked, never had a bad thing to say about anything or anyone. I guess that's just how depression is though. My good friend is a cop. This question comes up a lot. His second year in, he was the first on scene to a very horrible head-on collision. Drunk guy lost control of his car at about 70, crossed the center lane and hit a minivan. He said it looked like a bomb had gone off, car parts and glass sprayed over 5 lanes for 100 yards. He was trying to process what to do with bystanders screaming and unrealistic amounts of blood everywhere, radio calls, and his training all smashing through his mind at once. Killed the drunk driver's passenger immediately and his face was smashed in from the steering wheel. The dad driving the van was screaming for his wife, who was clearly dead. The baby's car seat wasn't properly secured, so he was launched into the windshield. By the time the life flight chopper arrived to evac the dad, my buddy was attempting CPR on the infant, the drunk driver was dead, and the father died later that day. 5 fatalities. He found out later the baby had been internally decapitated, but he said he still feels like he should have been able to save someone. Any of them. If he'd gotten there faster, or tried treating a different person first, or had better med gear in his car. It's been a long time, and he's been to a lot of terrible things since then, but that's the one he still talks about. Not me, but a close relative. When I asked this relative about his most interesting, worst day on the job, he immediately came up with this story. Walked into a house with blood sprayed and dripped everywhere, on multiple floors, and a single victim lying dead on the floor. Originally thought to be a violent murder, through the coroner's investigation and crime scene analysis it turned out to be much stranger. The woman had first tried to commit suicide by shooting herself in the temple with an antique gun and bullets. Turns out the gunpowder in the bullets had degraded, so they didn't manage to penetrate her skull. She then tried stabbing herself to death with a small kitchen knife, but even though she stabbed herself in the torso approximately 6 times, she didn't hit anything major and was still very much alive. Next, she tries beheading herself on a circular saw bench in the cellar. For whatever reason, she didn't manage to get very far and wandered back up the stairs. She then collapsed. The final cause of death was exsanguination, blood loss. I got a call for an uncontrolled burn on a field at a local grade school. No biggie, kids are dumbasses sometimes. I get there. 18-year-old kid pour gasoline on himself and light himself on fire. I extinguished the flames. He crawls to me, looking like something out of a horror film, skin falling off, begging me to help him. Medics get there, medevac him out. Kid lives for 2 more weeks and then dies. This was my first shift alone after FTO. Another obligatory, it's not me. My dad was a cop for 27 years in a neighboring town. There was a decent-sized airfield in it, so planes were always common around me. One day, my dad gets a call saying there is a plane crash. A Polish family visiting a doctor friend nearby went up in a plane and experienced engine failure about an hour in. The plane crashed hard into the slick runway after a recent snowfall. Everyone on board died, but there was a 6-year-old boy who had gone up with the family while his parents stayed on the ground. He was severed in half at the waist by his seatbelt. My dad says he distinctly remembers the distraught parents calmly take his partially intact corpse out of the plane, put him in his car seat, and insisted on taking him to the hospital. Scariest mental image I could imagine. My dad was not okay for about a week after that. Not a cop myself, but my father, uncle, grandfather all were. And my best friend is. All NYPD, PAPD. I'm not even sure which story is the craziest. I'm gonna go with my dad, who was stationed at the GW Bridge, getting a call one night for an accident on the bridge. Him and his partner arrived to find a car smashed, stalled on the road. They approached the driver's side and saw the driver unconscious and the passenger also unconscious. My dad went around to the passenger's side, and that half of the passenger's face was completely off. They found blood and brain matter all over one of the huge cement columns several feet back. Dude must have had his head out the window and got half of it taken clean off. My dad still shudders at the thought of it. Not me, but my friend is a cop. They got a call for a disturbance in a known problem area. Turns out there was some big argument, which ended horribly. Things got very heated. Bad pun, as one of the involved guys decided to go up a floor to his house, put on a pan of oil, then go down again to knock on the door and throw the boiling oil into the face of his adversary. Third-degree burns everywhere. Friend said the smell of cooked human was the worst he's ever had smelled. Not me, but a cop I worked with once. He got called out for a domestic dispute. The house was in one of the most affluent neighborhoods in town. He arrives and finds a man with his hand pinned to a table with a huge steak knife and a married couple who live at the house. He asks them each what happened, and the wife literally says, "He wanted the last piece of steak, and so did my husband, so I stopped him." In the most nonchalant tone. The guy whose hand was stabbed and bleeding all over the place said, "Well, I probably deserved it." The man got his hand treated and no charges were filed. My father is an officer of 27 years. When he was teaching me how to drive, he told me a story about a 16-year-old kid. The kid had gotten a brand new BMW for his birthday. He was driving with a car full of people on a back road way too fast. He was the only one without a seatbelt and crashed. The car rolled over him and impaled his lungs with his own ribs. My dad arrived on scene to 4 of his friends over him. Kid was laying face down, spiting blood, crying for his mother. He was alive somehow, and for 30 minutes my dad performed all he could to save this kid, which was next to nothing. The whole time kid's screaming and crying in grief around him. The kid stopped breathing just before the ambulance finally arrived. He was pronounced dead very soon after. I tend to drive careful now. Most likely lost in the comments. My paramedic brother-in-law was recently called out to a report of an intoxicated man seriously injuring himself. When he arrived on scene, there was a person limply standing next to the house with his friends next to him. Upon closer inspection, the person was completely unconscious but still standing, which was very confusing. It then became clear what had happened. The guy got really drunk and thought it would be a great idea to jump off the roof of the house and over the fence into the neighbor's garden. This fence was made of chicken wire supported by star pickets, a metal spike that looks like a star with 3 ends. The guy jumped, ended up landing straight on a star picket, which entered in between his genitals and anus and stopped at his collarbone. The guy had to be cut down, and was kept alive for 3 days before passing. I don't think they attempted to remove the spike because of its size and shape. The X-ray was horrible. Here's my top 2. 1. At night, responded to a report of either shots fired or fireworks near a football stadium. It was football season, so big tents were set up all around. Besides that, the stadium and parking lot were mostly empty. 9/10 times a call like this ends up being fireworks, or a car backfiring. Upon arrival, I circulate the parking lot. Nobody around. Shortly before I was gonna clear the call, my spotlight illuminates what looks like a guy sitting in a chair under one of those big tents. I holler at him. He doesn't answer, so I call it in to dispatch, get out, and walk up slowly. He's seated in a chair facing away from me, and it looks like his head is down, as in his chin on his chest. I keep walking up and keep calling out to him, but he doesn't move or answer. I finally walk into the tent, and get close enough to realize, his head's not down, it's gone. Just gone. I see a shotgun lying next to his feet, and that's when I feel something fall on my shoulder. Some kind of red goop. That's when I shine my flashlight up, and see that the ceiling of the tent is completely splattered with a mix of brains, blood, and bits of skull, and it was dripping all over me. 2. Another shots fired call. This time when I get on scene, I hear someone screaming behind a house. I run behind the house and see two kids, late teens early 20s, laying down. One has been shot through the arm. Not life-threatening but no doubt painful. The other is unresponsive. I run back to my car for my go bag, give the kid shot through the arm a bandage from it and tell him to hold pressure, then start working on the other kid. He's got a sucking chest wound, through and through. Sounds like his lungs are already collapsing. I only had one Asherman seal, so I sealed up the back, and tried to keep the other hole sealed with the plastic from the Asherman seal while I did chest compressions when he stopped breathing. The medics were staging until we could secure the scene. Another officer showed up and we sealed the other wound, but it was too late. He was pronounced dead at the hospital, which was, actually right across the street. What stuck with me about this one was, it wasn't the first time I'd responded to a shooting or had to do first aid or CPR on a victim. But it was the first time I could really say that the victim was a victim. Asterisk most of the times when we have a shooting, it's gang member versus gang member, or a drug deal gone wrong, or both parties are drunk, high. Basically the victim has at least some responsibility for the situation they're in. Not these kids. It was a clear-cut armed robbery. They didn't want to give up their stuff, so they got shot. The victim having some responsibility allows me to lighten the emotional load a bit. Play stupid games, win stupid prizes, that kind of thing. But when it's someone completely innocent, who was just being, I dunno, a person, that sucks hard. Our detectives eventually caught the guys, and I testified as to what I did on scene and evidence preservation and all that. I wish I could have testified as to the sounds that kid's sucking chest wound made, and the gurgling sound he made when he finally stopped breathing, and the smell of him having shat himself. Late to the party, but my dad's been a paramedic fireman for 38 years, and one story that he always says sticks with him was a parachuting accident. This rich guy owned a house on a big lake, and he and his friends would go parachute down into the lake and then go party at his house. So some of his friends came into town and were going to parachute into the lake that day. One of them was this chick, and she didn't have her own gear, so she borrowed someone else's stuff. They jump out of the plane above the lake, and the chick, no familiar with the gear, fucks something up and her parachute malfunctions and she ends up plummeting to earth and into the lake. When my dad got there, they had pulled her body out of the lake. She was DOA, but her body was completely split all the way up to her neck. So basically she split completely in half. I am not a police officer, but I shadowed one for school project. He told me a lot of stories, but this one he said messed him up more than anything. He got a call late at night that a car had crashed to the highway. He has been a police officer for about 6 years at the time, and he has not seen anything too bad at that point. He gets to the crash and he noticed he was the first officer or any emergency worker to arrive, so he tried to control the scene. So he ran up to the car to see what he need to call in. Well, he said he was expecting the crash not to be too bad because the outside the car was not damaged too badly. The car was on its side but was not in too bad of shape. With all the new safety features in cars, he knew that everyone in the car should be okay. Well, he was half right. The car was filled with 2 parents and 3 kids. The parents were already out of the vehicle but had none of the kids. People that saw the crash helped the parents who had crawled out from the car. The parents were so shocked they did not know what happened to their car or their kids. So he checked the car for any signs of life, but there was none to be found. He radioed in that he needed a medical team there right away. But it was not for all the kids. One of the kids was alive but had a major cut on her head and was not responding. But he felt a pulse, so he knew the child had limited time left before she was dead too. The other 2 kids were sadly a different story. When they crashed they were going 45 miles per hour, because they were on an off-ramp, so they slowed to get off. But one of the tires exploded and the mother lost control and flipped the car into some small trees. The trees were no match for the car, but the kids near the windows were no match for the trees. The kids' heads exploded on impact with these tree spears. One kid's head was just all gone and his face and brains were all over the tree that hit him. The other child had some of his head together, but the tree hit him in the neck and jaw, so his head was clean cut off his body. The kid with big cut on top her head was the youngest of the kids and the shortest. So the tree just clipped the top of her head. She lived after the medical team did a badass job of fixing her. The parents were sent with their last surviving child to the hospital. The officer I shadowed said he still has dreams about that night even after 24 years. Not me or anyone that I know, but a kid, roughly 15 to 16 years old, tripped off of his skateboard in front of a school bus yesterday. The bus driver couldn't see him and only stopped after hearing kids screaming. The wheel ran over his head and killed him instantly. The worst part was that it happened right after school, with hundreds of kids out by the bus lot. His mom was less than 5 minutes away from picking him up. I was part of a citizens police academy for my city, and the dispatcher told her best and worst stories. The best is in the dispatcher topic. This was the worst. A man called and said his girlfriend had killed herself. Police respond and find her dead in the tub, having bled out. After interrogating the boyfriend, this is apparently the timeline. Girlfriend is pregnant and the early 20-year-olds don't want kids, at least. Not then. This wasn't her first time, so she did the same thing they did last time. She got a hanger and tried to take care of it. Again, while he was playing video games. Well, she apparently messed up and bled out there in the tub. After he hadn't seen her for a while, he checked on her, found her dead, and then went and called the police. She essentially stabbed herself and, while he was distracted by video games, she bled out. My father works in a prison. I get stories all the time. The one that I think of the most was about a guy in a rubber room. He had been yelling and screaming about killing the whole night, so they put him in a rubber room to keep him from hurting anyone or himself. Problem was, this guy's wanted to seem crazy so people wouldn't fuck with him. He tore his intestines out of his colostomy hole and laid them out of the rubber floor and calmly waited for an officer to find him. My dad has seen some shit, so he just told the guy to scoop it up and come with him to medical. The nut got up on a gurney and was rolled through the floor with his guts in his arms. Word travels fast and nobody wanted to fuck with him, but it didn't matter because he served his sentence in a solitary rubber unit to prevent him from doing more crazy shit for respect, defense against other inmates. My dad wasn't a cop, but he was an EMT for a long time. He spent a lot of time going to the same situations that the police did. One of the worst ones was a car accident where a mother and toddler were killed. The baby was a small girl with long brown hair that looked a lot like mine. Dad bent down to assess the injuries, and first thing he saw was the baby's hair, because she hadn't been in a car seat and had been thrown into the dashboard. Her entire face was buried in the radio. He told me later that for a couple seconds, he really thought that it was me. He came home that night and just picked me up and held me for hours. Wouldn't speak at all to my mom until the sun came up. It's the first time I remember him ever holding me, and it was the first time and only time I ever saw him crying. He never lets me leave the yard without buckling up.